Hello again, everyone. Edwin Learnard back once again. In this YouTube segment, what I'm going to be talking about is why I believe people forget us, and this obviously is a multitude of things, and because the answers can go on forever, I'm not going to obviously be able to state all the reasons, but I'm going to talk about some reasons that I think are often frequent in terms of why people forget of us, or the most common ones, perhaps, or at least some of the most common ones. Anyway, the thing about this is, well, for one thing, sometimes people will dissipate out of our lives inexplicably, and a lot of times we don't really understand what the reason is. We might be beating ourselves up, figuratively speaking, and really pondering, wonder why this is. Well, in most cases it probably isn't our fault. In some cases it can be. I think sometimes what happens is, if we're going through some dilemmas, or we're involved in some predicament, or we become homeless, for example, or are facing oppression or real strong problems, a lot of times people will distance themselves from us because they simply don't want to be part of that problem. But in doing so, of course, they basically unveil who they really are. So there is some good aspects in that. The bad news is you had some deserters, but at the same time you knew who your friends were. Now, another thing is, I think sometimes people just become very engrossed and involved in their own activities and affairs. And when I say affairs, I just really mean activities. Sometimes that can be affairs, though, included. But anyway, I mean literal affairs, whether it's clandestine or just what I mean is their own sexual involvement, is interludes they have, I guess you could say, with others. That happens. That could be the reason on occasion. But what I mean is that people get dominated often by their own interests. Sometimes another reason I think is pretty common is that what happens is, say you're friendly with somebody, say on social media, and you're corresponding with each other pretty frequently. Then what happens is that person you were corresponding with gets a significant other in his or her life. Then all of a sudden you notice that the communication starts to diminish, and it doesn't really take that long to put two and two together, or one and one, or whatever you want to call it, one and one to equal two, or what have you. The math becomes very simple. And what happens is, and if that person breaks up with that new significant other, a lot of times you'll see that person coming right back to you and continuing the conversation as if he or she never left. And some people just are flat out inconsiderate, I believe. I definitely think this figures prominently in a lot of this. A lot of times people will only contact us at their own convenience when they need something, and then they will wonder why we didn't even bother responding. I mean, what happens is, you know, like if you're on Facebook, right? I'm sure most of you know this, that like when you get a message, you get that thing that lights up. It's like a little red box by your mailbox icon or whatever, and you click it and you see who wrote you. Now, if it's the person that was incessantly asking you for something before, I mean previously, for this, or can you do this, can you do that, then what happens is you might become reluctant to answer that person. So on the other side of the coin, we might distance ourselves from others for that reason. Now, if we're also somebody that, I mean, most of you out there, most people aren't users or manipulators or what have you, but the few of you that may see this, that know that you are, well, you have to understand that maybe the person distanced themselves from you, or the people have, for those reasons, because they might have felt like every time you were contacting them that you wanted something. So those are some things to consider as far as why people disappear in life. Sometimes other people are going through their own turmoil, and we all go through trials and tribulations, people, and really it's no exception when you're talking about friendships, relationships, or what have you. Sometimes that person that kind of dissipates into thin air, so to speak, maybe going through some personal issues, and it really doesn't have anything to do with anything you did or didn't do. Another thing could be too is when you look at this too, when people do things like this, sometimes they find somebody that they think that they're more enthralled with than you. Honestly, I mean, when I can remember a long time ago when I lived in New York, this was around 1986 or 87, somewhere around that, I believe. And somebody I talked with somebody. I said, hey, I noticed that we don't really hang out much anymore, or whatever. And he said, well, do you ever think maybe it's because I like those people better than you, or something to that effect? Now, I thought the remark was very blunt, and it came across a little bit brusque to me, but at least the person was able to confront me head on. I do give him credit to this day for saying that. I didn't think it was very nice. I still, have issues with that statement in a way, but it is what it is. And I'm just saying, as an example, sometimes people find other people that are more interesting in their minds, that are people that they're more entertained by, or what have you. I don't think that gives them an excuse to give up on you as well, but sometimes people will do that. You have a lot of superficial people out there, and a lot of people, I think most people are aware of this. Some people aren't, though. So anyway, those are, some of the reasons I think they're very common why things like this do happen. And what's sad sometimes is you'll have in some isolated cases too, that you'll have somebody that might say something bad about you to somebody that might be your friend, and that person they made that derisive remark to, that they said that thing, whoever it was they made that statement to about you, if they're gullible enough and they believe in, especially if it's not true, and what happens is that person that had that the remark was stated to by this adversary of yours or whatever, they might believe it, and then they distance themselves from you, and then you don't understand, well, what the heck ever happened, and that person might not ever say what the actual reason was, that it was somebody, that was because they heard something negative about you that was never proven, and they wanted to stay away from you for that reason. Now, I know that that's very rare, but sometimes that happens. Sometimes you have people that will gossip and won't even say the actual truth when they're doing so. I mean, if someone's going to be a gossip, at least say what's going to be veracious and true, and not something that's not true. So, but sometimes people will lie on us and will convince the person that they told that lie to that it's actually true, and causes those people they made the statement to consequently distance themselves from us. And it's sad that it goes down like that a lot, but I think it happens more than people actually do realize. And really, the thing about it too is that what I find interesting is that you'll have some people that will act a certain way toward you. They'll act like they're infatuated with you, they're enamored with you one minute, and then you'll have them, I don't know if it's because they're just very fickle and flighty, then they just have this whim and this change of mind, and then they just disappear. I had somebody one time, I think it was, I can't quite remember 100% whether it was a Facebook message or a text to my number, but one or the other, less than a year ago, perhaps I got something on the text or on the Facebook message. It stated something like, well, you're the only one that understands me. And then shortly after that, the person ran into some problems and had left for a little bit, or left town or something. And then when she came back, I barely even heard from her. So that's why what hurts is when people have to say certain things, maybe because they just want something at the time and they truly don't mean it. And what happens is, as a result, sometimes those people will go, I hate to, I'm not sound arrogant or anything, but sometimes those people will wind up drifting away towards somebody that's less worthy than we are, in for whatever reason. And sometimes those things are just inexplicable, and we don't really know why people do those things. Sometimes it could just be out of convenience. Maybe sometimes people will say something to us very complimentary at the time because they're just trying to get something from us. They're trying to butter us up, so to speak. And what happens is, if it's not effective, then they move on to their next prey perhaps, and they just try to do that to somebody else. And I think that has something to do with that a lot, because if the person actually cared, hey, they wouldn't just disappear into thin air after making not sending you one nice text, or sending whatever it was in this case. Like I said, I don't remember 100%. I think it was probably a text, but it might have been a Facebook message. And it is what it is, and that's how unfortunately how people will do us. And anyway, I think that pretty much covers what I was going to say about why people will disappear sometimes. And I think one other thing I want to touch upon is that sometimes I think what happens too is, say if it's an employment situation, you're in a job with somebody, I don't know who else would concur with this or have these similar experiences, but I think what happens in some instances is that you'll have people that you work with, right? And you felt you had a good rapport with them. Might be people that you actually hung out with after work, right? And then what happens is they move away. Something distressing happens. I had this happen with 2 different people, at least that I can remember, that worked with me at a Kmart store. And one of them wound up having his child was murdered. I believe it was in the same city or general area he worked at one time. And I think he moved to get away from the memory, is my theory. And then there was another person that had moved to another state, and I thought we were pretty cool at the time, had a good rapport, and we were friends. We had played basketball during the time when I was able to, before I succumbed to my nerve damage being basically exacerbated in my arms, where I can't even do that anymore. But anyway, we used to hang out and play basketball, or hang out at his place, or he'd come over to mine. And what happened was, when he moved to another state, the contact just communication dissipated. And the last time I had spoke with him, I think I said this on which was some years ago, I said, let's try to stay in touch, okay? And he just kind of was like, and didn't really even answer me. I think what I'm getting at, though, with all this talking about it, is that sometimes when you work with somebody, and you're, even no matter how friendly you were with them, when they decide to move off to another state, it's almost like they want to eradicate that memory of that place and that location. By doing so, they feel, I think, at least subconsciously in some instances, that what they do is they cut off ties with those people that they worked with during that time, which really doesn't sound fair or right, but they're able to rationalize that in their mind. They're trying to say, okay, it's time to move forward. That means these relationships, these friendships come to an end. I'm starting over somewhere else. Goodbye, people, without really literally saying goodbye. So that's another thing to look at as well. Well, anyway, people, that'll conclude this YouTube segment for my thoughts on why people disappear in our lives. And until next time, people, Edwin Learnard saying, stay well.